The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
He is the congressman from Rhode Island's 2nd District, 21 years as a congressman, after being Rhode Island's Secretary of State before that. But most important, and he serves on 2 committees. He's a concentrated congressman. He has 2 big committee assignments. One of them is House Armed Services Committee, their cyber subcommittee he's the chairman of. And then the other is the Committee on Homeland Security's cyber committee. So he doesn't mess around. He is generally regarded, widely regarded, as the most thoughtful, intelligent, experienced cyber leader in Congress, culminated by his role as a commissioner on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. So Congressman Langevin, we're really glad to have you here today.
Well, Mark, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the kind words. But you have done such an outstanding job on cyber and moving the Cyberspace Solarium Commission along. And although I may reap the benefits of having many of these cyber accomplishments tied to my name, in large part is because of your work and the team at Solarium and the collective synergy between you and I and Angus King and Mark Gallagher and all the commissioners, really what made just a huge difference. Although I may have be the beneficiary of some of the accolades, the hard work, the real horsepower was your leadership and the team there, and it was a group team effort and one I was proud to be a part of. But thank you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thanks, sir. And I'll throw one more compliment at you. Congressman Langevin has grown cyber expertise. Right now, one of the assistant directors over the National Cyber Director's Office, Nick Lesserson, was developed under Congressman Langevin. Evan Burke is current cyber lead on this. Really brilliant cyber, junior cyber, not junior, but younger cyber legislators and professionals. So that's been fantastic. Well, let's get right into it. Looking back on the last 2 cycles of legislation that the commission pushed forward and that you in your committee chairmanship kind of honchoed, what strikes you as the most important accomplishments over the last 2 cycles?
Yeah, and let me just say that more has happened on cyber over the last couple of years, and in my previous now going on 22 years in Congress. In a large part, again, a lot of credit goes to, all the credit really goes to the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and what a great collaborative process it was. We had some 80 recommendations, and one of the most important of which, and the one that I'm most proud of, since I had been trying to accomplish this for about a decade until Solarium came along, was the creation of the National Cyber Director. You just alluded to it a minute ago, and talking about Nick, being over there, the national at ONCD, Office of National Cyber Director. But the big accomplishment was creating the National Cyber Director. That was sort of the one major position, as I looked at it, that was missing from the playing field, if you were. If you had, you think of a football team, if you've got your tight ends and wide receivers and your blockers, defenders, but you don't have a quarterback, it just doesn't cut it. And that's what I saw. We just didn't have a quarterback on the field that was tying together our cyber defense policies and could be a convener, where someone that had their eyes on the ball with the policy and budgetary authority to kind of look across government compelled departments and agencies whose primary mission is not going to be ever just cyber, right? Department of Treasury, Department of Commerce, Department of State, they have their missions, but cyber is not their primary focus. And we really needed someone that was going to have their eye on the ball and make sure that we were, we had all hands on deck and we were coordinating our cyber policy. So that was the major one. The other one, of course, we've strengthened CISA. That is now the nation's premier cyber agency, and we've given that the position there again further authorities to increase its efficacy and its effectiveness and the budget that goes along with that. So that's another major thing that was accomplished. So, and we continue to work to strengthen CISA with the resources that it really needs. The other thing I mentioned is codifying the sector risk management agencies. That's something that is now in law, establishing minimum responsibilities and requirements, basically for identifying and assessing, assisting, and managing risk for critical infrastructure sectors under their purview. So those are just some of the highlights, but it really all starts with National Cyber Director.
You gave me two thoughts. I started to laugh. You have to be a congressman from the greater Boston area to really understand how important the quarterback is on a football team. But also, I'm glad you mentioned the SRMA one. In fact, Suzanne and I, before you came on, were just talking about that. Boring people like you and me called the 9002 amendment because it was provision 9002 in that NDAA. But it's so important to say, here's the rule set, because I remember that you and Senator King were like Don Quixote, going at the windmill over the issue of we need one cyber committee. And we lost, obviously. And I think it's going to take a really dramatic event to get to one cyber committee. But in the absence of that, you need good oversight by dozens of committees. And of course, not having rules for an SRMA, for Sector Risk Management Agency, which are basically about 12 different executive branch agencies, not having a common set of rules and responsibilities, I think was killing us. It was not doing what energy was doing and DoD was doing, and it was just unacceptable.
Yeah, completely agreed. So now we have those responsibilities laid out. We have kind of more defined rules of the road, and I think clarity and certainty is always important, so that you don't have the finger pointing in opposite directions when either before or after something bad happens. You hopefully prevent the bad things from happening by having that certainty. Everybody knows what who's responsible for what, and you can proceed more effectively going forward.
Yeah, thanks. Well, look, that was the good news, and I join you in the NCD. The recognition of the NCD is really important. Probably a criticism.
Couldn't have a better guy there. I mean, he was my recommendation to the president. Angus King is his recommendation to the president. We were pressing hard for Chris Inglis since he was a member of the commission, and we saw him in action. I had the privilege of working with him when he was deputy director out there at NSA, and his reputation precedes himself. We couldn't have a better first national cyber director. So thrilled with him being there and the progress he's making.
Yeah, thanks. I agree completely. But so if I were to think that if there's a criticism of what didn't get done, broadly, this could be about the commission, but more broadly about the government, is that we have not done enough on the public-private collaboration. There's a lot of what you'd say, a lot of RPM, but not a lot of torque. A lot of talking, but not a lot of action. What do you kind of think the steps are to get us to the collaboration you want to see?
Yeah, and I've often said the government cannot do this alone. Private sector cannot do this alone in terms of better protecting the country against the cyber threats that we all face collectively. It really requires that public-private partnership that'll always be the kind of the first line of defense, if you will. One of the big things that's still left undone is this. What I see is the joint collaborative environment, and working together to make sure that you have a space where especially the most critical of critical infrastructure sectors can do real-time analysis or information sharing with a common tool set. And that's what creating the joint collaborative environment would allow. So it wouldn't be for everybody per se right away. We start kind of smaller with those critical entities. So think of an entity getting hit with a major cyber attack. If that were an energy company, for example, or the banking system, it's not just the company having a bad day, but the whole country has a bad day. So by sharing and analyzing real-time threat intelligence, we'll be better protected. We know where to concentrate our defenses and hopefully prevent the bad things from happening in the first place. I'm, having served on 8 years on the Intelligence Committee, I will always be a believer that good intelligence, the best intelligence, is always going to be the pointy tip of the spear. If you know where the threats are coming from, you know where the bad actors are, you know where to target them, then you can prevent the bad things from happening way left of boom. And that's what I would hope we'd see with a joint collaborative environment in terms of being prepared and strengthening our defenses ahead of time.
Thanks. That's a great point. And is it fair to say that the joint collaborative environment is in the mix for this year's NDAA?
Yes, I should have mentioned that. Thank you again. Pointing that out is refreshing my memory that, of course, that's one of the big things that I was able to get into we were able to get into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and so we are pressing to have that brought across the finish line, and hopefully in the final NDAA that's worked out between the House and the Senate. We can't let up though. Now's not the time to take our foot off the gas, if you will. We need to make sure that we're putting all pressure that we can and pulling all the oars in the right direction to make sure that the JCE stays in the bill. But these are this would be also a new social contract, if you will, between government and these private sector critical entities, systemically important critical entities that we would require, because more information sharing on the part of these entities back with the government, but at the same time, we would they would be getting more direct real-time threat intelligence and other benefits that we can offer to incentivize their participation and assist them in protecting their own networks.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, and then hopefully the Senate will put in some mirroring language and make it easy to get through. If they don't, that'll just make your September, October a little busier as you try to bring it from one side. One of the important things I like to mention on this, a really not understood impact of the commission has been that working with the commission staff, you, Representative Gallagher, and Senator King have written letters each of the last 3 years, detailed inputs to the Senate and House appropriators with anywhere from 35 to 50 programs with about $1 billion worth of recommendations. And my this is loose Navy math, but about 60% get tackled. In other words, they take up what we recommend, maybe because they would have anyway, but these are adjustments on the president's budget. And I try to explain to people that we know that you can't add any more money to the JCPO, the Joint Cyber Planning Office line. You really need this extra authorization of the JCE so that you can get what I think is to get that collaborative environment going is not $10 million a year. It's going to be significantly more than that. So this authorization is a precursor to increased authorizations, appropriations in future years. And I think that's an appropriate way to look at it. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. It generally always is a two-step process, the way that it's supposed to work. And you have higher authorization levels than the appropriations work toward matching the authorization level. It doesn't get there all at once, but over time the goal is to continue to add to it since it's appropriated at those levels. So that's another reason why we need to continue writing letters to appropriators. We need to continue to be engaged in the authorization process, and so again, pulling the oars in the same direction gets us to where we need to be.
I'm only laughing because on at least 2 occasions, you've taught me how you actually get something appropriated and then authorize it. But, that's not for general consumption. All right. All right, sir. We
do have a view of the way the world works. And
yeah. If you have any other tricks, you need to give them to me soon. Hey, we got a lot of data coming into the U.S. government. I saw something from R Street. I think Congressional Research Service did something based on yours and Senator King's request of information that showed we have 15 or 16 data streams of incident reporting coming into the government through different stovepipe systems. In addition, we passed the incident reporting language that you had been advocating for. And although you probably join me and be a little disappointed that the data may not start till 2025, I think that's a little far off. Once it does start, we're going to have a lot of incident reporting data. How do we prepare to digest this?
Yeah, so my answer to that is we need a centralized kind of repository for this, and I've long advocated for the creation of what is a Bureau of Cyber Statistics, and so that it can aggregate this data, it can be anonymized, it can be analyzed, but I think it helps everybody, both government and private sector, to be able to analyze this data. You know, the one big question, I used to press staff on this all the time, and you know, but how do we know what cyber defenses are working best? How do we make the case, even the business case, for where do we spend our next cyber dollar that's going to yield the best return on investment? And a lot of it, it's, you know, maybe anecdotal, and we don't really have the, you know, the kind of data that we'd like to have to be able to say, yes, this is most effective. You know, think two-factor authentication. You know, we have a general sense that is it works really well, and probably even say, you know, I would say data says that works really well, but on all of it, we don't have, you know, the kind of hard data that we would like to have. And so this goes to a number of cyber tools, cyber defenses. So I've long advocated that we need, it's wonky, right? And maybe, oh, that's what we'll get really down to the weeds, get excited about a Bureau of Cyber Statistics, but I think that's something that's really needed. It didn't, unfortunately, make it into the final version of the NDAA this year. We came close, but I hope others will take up the cause, and it will be in a future NDAA, or make its way through another bill or on its own in a coming session of Congress.
And of course, we're hoping maybe Senator King can roll a 7 and you know, and get it in through a Senate floor amendment, but we've been disappointed with that route before, so I don't want to go too far down it. That's great. The you know, yeah. Oh, I should say to everyone, I'm getting near the end of my questions. If you have a question for Congress Langevin, please you know, get it to Brad, and he'll get it to me. I did want to take this opportunity. There's a few international listeners on, and what do you see as the international challenges we've got in cyberspace, and what kind of issues do you think we ought to be working on right now?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to start off by saying that I give so much credit to President Biden and the Biden administration on all they have done on cyber. And again, in partnership with the Congress, in partnership with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, we've made great progress. And so, just a kind of an overview before I get to your answer, you've got, you know, Chris Inglis as the first National Cyber Director. You've got Jen Easterly, head of CISA at DHS. You have Ann Neuberger, who's over at the NSC as Deputy National Cyber Director within the NSC, and I'm sorry, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber on the NSC. And then the one piece that's still missing is a high-ranking position, a ambassador-ranking position over at the State Department. So there's a bill moving through Congress, the Cyber Diplomacy Act, which I hope will be enacted into law soon. But in the meantime, the State Department has created their Bureau of Cyber and Digital Policy Office, and it will have an ambassador rank position there, which I'm very excited about. And that will be our international forward-leaning office and person that will engage with our partners and allies to better collectively work together to shore up our cyber defenses. Again, cybersecurity and the vulnerabilities that we face are not just a U.S. problem, it's an international problem, and we need international solutions or international cooperation to get there. And by the way, you know, over the previous administration, the role of the State Department was significantly diminished, including Chris Painter's position at State being eliminated. It left a vacuum, a void on the international stage, and our enemies and adversaries are all too happy to fill that void when it comes to working on these international policy standards bodies that do have an impact in shaping the cyber ecosystem, if you will, and exploiting them for their benefit to the detriment of the the international community and our interests here in the United States. So again, a lot of credit goes to the administration and Congress and all of us who have collectively been working together to really have now the right people and the right policies in place, and now we just have to go forward and really execute them.
That's great, sir. In fact, I'm tracking two developments in that. One is Nate Fick, the nominee, was voted out of the committee, which is great, at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Now he is at the back of a long line of judges and ambassadors and assistant secretaries of this and that. I don't know if he'll get a booster shot, to jump a bunch of them or not. But if he stays in the line, I think we're 4 to 6 months away. But not great. The only thing I'd say that helps with that is I do think the Cyber Diplomacy Act is being considered in the Senate Foreign Relations, the Reauthorization Act of the State Department, which would be like all good things, strapped onto the back of your NDAA, and hopefully they are close enough to the House version that it's an easy, there's an easy mix. And because I think you're right, it's fantastic that an administration creates a billet. It's long-term fantastic if Congress creates the law that backs it up and keeps the billet in play, so that it doesn't, disappear during a subsequent administration. Those are great points.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to codify this new Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy into law. That's what the Cyber Diplomacy Act would ensure, so that it's not subject to the whims of an administration that may not see the value in diplomacy. So hopefully we'll get that across the finish line soon.
Thanks. And you remind me too that in the CHIPS Act, you and I both put a lot of legislation to that, and a handful of things got through. Some things got lost, which have some are back in the NDA, some are orphans right now. But one of the couple of things that got done, it's this quiet, boring stuff. Standard. What was approved was organization for standard setting for the U.S. government participation in international standing setting organizations, funding to help companies participate in that, because that's an area where the Chinese and Russians, but particularly the Chinese, have begun to introduce a non-transparent, non-rules-based vision. So I'm hoping we can participate more in those. And what's your thought on those standard setting organizations?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that they do have an impact on policy going forward and on the international stage. And so, being engaged, being forward leaning, I think is really essential. And so I don't want us to be on the sidelines. We need to be in the thick of it and helping to shape policy. Again, we have a rules-based society that that respects the rule of law and international norms and standards. We want to see those values conveyed in other policy-making bodies or outcomes that come from those interactions, those collaborations, and policy or norm setting. So I think it's important for us to be very forward-leaning, working again with our partners and allies in a collaborative way.
And you remind me that there's an election coming up, the International Telecommunications Union in November. And I think the two candidates, one of them's an American who's a career bureaucrat in Europe in these kind of organizations, but certainly committed to transparency and rule of law. And then the other candidate is a Russian who spent most of his career in the Russian Ministry of Information. And I would just say, in general, not an organization known for its commitment to transparency and the rule of law. So having the kind of leadership to do it. I remember a few years ago, we gaffed it off for so long. It took the Secretary of State personally intervening to make sure that the World Intellectual Property Organization, or WIPO, didn't end up with a Chinese leader at a time that I think would have been detrimental to its use.
Yes, and that's therein lies the crux of the challenge and the problem, right? That if we are silent, if we're not present at those international organizations that are going to develop international policy, and we're not helping to work with and convince our partners and allies or other countries that are on the fence, well, nature hates a vacuum. And again, our enemies or adversaries are all too happy to fill it and influence the outcome and seize the day. And that's long term, it's to our own detriment and that of our partners and allies.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I do have one question before I have a final question for you, but before I get to that, I do have a question from the audience. It's a DoD one. So from Steve Rodriguez, how does Congressman Langevin feel the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, will affect DoD contractors And when do you think CMMC will be kind of up and running and fully integrated?
Yeah, good question. It's really important for us to have our arms around our supply chain, and CMMC is going to be, I think, critical to that effort and to the security of our supply chain going forward. The one thing that we haven't quite figured out yet, and we have to do a better job of working with, not only the big primes, because they've got the resources to defend their networks and their critical vulnerabilities, if you will, in the supply chain on the top level. But it's that third, fourth, and fifth order companies in the supply chain further down, that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if the mom and pop software development firms, for example, the 3 and 4 person shops who don't have the resources to employ and have robust cyber defenses, there's a weak link there. We need to do a better job of helping them, and it just frustrates that we haven't done enough, or we've kind of made incremental progress. We need to factor that in contracting. Understand that that's a service that should be billed for. That they can be they can charge for it. It's factored into the security of their contract and the products they produce. So we have to do more on that front, and I hope that as we go forward, that'll be another area we'll make provision for and see stronger outcomes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we had the CTIC, like I said, we had Laura Gallant from CTIC, which one of our big recommendations, both the work we did, but as much the Biden administration when Tom Donahue came in and took over as the cyber executive. They got the CTIC up and running again. There's a supply chain intel center as well that I really think the intelligence community needs to kind of put a little more oxygen in, to help us get at that issue. And so those are 2 great ways of getting at supply chain. Hey, if I could ask you one last question, sir. I think it's widely known that you're retiring at the end of this legislative cycle, which is completely inappropriate and it's something I'm not happy about. But on a personal level, what are you thinking about Jim Langevin 2.0, for the next chapter?
Well, thank you for the question. It really has been an honor to serve these going on 22 years now in Congress, and then because I was 6 years before that, I was Rhode Island Secretary of State. 6 years before that, I served 6 years in the legislature, and so I've been involved in government and elective office for most of my adult life. So it will be a transition. There's a bit of getting used to for sure. But I'm looking forward to staying a little bit closer to home. But I don't rule out coming to DC if it's maybe just a few days, once a month or so. I wouldn't mind that. I want to be involved in cyber in some way, shape, or form, and hopefully contribute the expertise that I've developed all these years. I certainly will be an outside resource now, and anytime organizations or even Congress wants to bounce things off me, I'll always answer my phone, and I'd like to be involved there somehow. But I haven't quite figured out what the next step will be. I'm still working hard right up until the end of my term, at the end of this year, and then as I'm going, I'm talking to different folks to get their advice about what I should look like. People that have done a transition before, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So, but
you need to be either a falcon or a hawk during the lame duck session, getting your last piece of legislation through. And I heard you say 2 days a week in DC. I'm afraid it's hard to be the national cyber director with only 2 days a week, but we'll have to think about that. Suzanne, should I pass it back over to you now?
Yeah, I just want to squeeze in one question before we let the congressman go, if that's okay. And Mark, you've literally been asking the questions that I had, which is what comes next. But if I could just ask one final question, sir, it would be, if you did have that big red easy button on your desk when it came to cyber, and there was one piece of legislation that you really were able to pass before your term is over, what would that one piece be? What is that one block that you think is part of that sort of fundamental base that we really need next?
Yeah, it's the the joint collaborative environment is my top priority right now, because you think of where the greatest vulnerabilities exist, and where could the country, where could our enemies, our adversaries really target us, and that's a force multiplier that could really bring the country to its knees. It really is in our critical infrastructure sectors. Think financial sector, telecommunications, our energy sector, electric grid. Electric grid, by the way, that was the thing that started me on this journey when I became aware of the Aurora threat, SCADA attack on electric grid energy production, and how I saw for the first time that how there could be physical damage caused through a cyber attack, and it could shut down the country's electric grid, not just, or a portion of it, a section of it, for not just days or weeks, but potentially months. So the joint collaborative environment would create that kind of that real-time common operating picture and tool set to both analyze and share information in real time. By the way, a lot of credit goes to Tom Fanning with Southern Company, who he was one that helped really raise and shape that concept. And he's obviously he was representing the critical infrastructure sector, and he said, and by the way, I was surprised that he had proposed it initially, but it was a great concept and something that I've been a believer in for a long time, that we have to have that closer collaborative working environment between government and private sector critical infrastructure, and JC is it.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Mr. Fanning and Mr. Montgomery in Atlanta not very long ago on that very topic. So, sir, I thank you so much, and thank you for your service as well. And Mark, fantastic job sort of guiding us through these two conversations from the private sector perspective on the vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, and now the congressional. Gentlemen, I really want to thank you both for being with the Cyber Initiatives Group today. Thank you.